Okay, folks, over my shoulder is the 91 Vert, and today we're going to be running a little bit of an experiment on it. Now, it never fails. Each and every time I post a picture of this car, the most commonly asked question I get is, how is it lowered? Well, here's the quick high level. The front of this car has an iBox Sportline lowering spring from a hardtop car. It also has the stock strut in it still, okay? So not the convertible springs, the hardtop springs. The rear, this is where it gets kind of crazy, is stock spring, stock shock, okay? Now, granted, it doesn't have the best ride height, but it's not awful. It does pull off a pseudo lowered look. It's not infamous Project Territory lowered, but it does pull it off not bad. A little bit of a rake versus the front. So a couple weeks ago, I was at my mom's place, and the poor gal, she's been packing all this garbage around with her for all these years that I've left behind. These are the stock springs from my 92 coupe, okay, front and rear. The front I'm not concerned about, the rears I am. I want to put these in the rear of this convertible and see if I can drop the ride height any, because in theory, they're a lower spring rate than the convertible springs from a stock standpoint. So I'm wondering, will it bring the car down any? All right, springs are out, both sides, and I've got them over on the bench. So what you were looking at here, these are the springs out of the Vert. Okay, these just came out of there. These are my coupe springs. Now, I'm gonna try to give you a bit of a look here. The coupe springs are ever so slightly shorter than the Vert springs already. So that's a good thing, right? Because we do want to come down some. Now, something I want to point out to everybody here, because there's a lot of information out there surrounding whether or not you can or should cut coil springs. Now, what I want to draw your attention to here is this from Ford Motorsport, okay? This bottom half of the paragraph. If the ride height is still too high after several hundred miles of spring break-in, removing half coil from the spring will lower the car approximately 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. Remove this material from the bottom of the front coil spring and the top of the rear spring if desired. All right, folks, now I don't want to beat a dead horse because I know cutting coils can be a hot topic. I just found it rather humorous that Ford Motorsport themselves, the almighty, says, cut coils, you're good. Okay, now for anyone interested in just a quick high level as to where and why cutting coils gets bad press, here's a little history lesson for you. So front coil cutting is typically more favorably looked upon, and the reason being is no matter where you cut your coil, you still maintain this pigtail section, which is at the bottom of the coil, that locates itself in a pocket of the lower front control arm. So that, I think there's no argument there. Most people agree that front coil cutting is okay. Rear coil cutting, however, there's two issues here. So like Ford said, cut from the top, but when you cut from the top, you kind of lose this flat section, right? Now, a quick workaround on that is, say you cut it to over here, well, you bust out your angle grinder and you give yourself a new flat section that's gonna sit flush in the rear of the frame on the body. The bottom you don't want to cut because this pigtail section locates itself in a pocket on the rear control arm, okay? Now, the other side of this is where it kind of, my definition or explanation might get a little confusing, but depending on where you cut, like how much of the top you cut off your coil, is going to change how this bottom pigtail section locates itself on the rear control arm. And there is a particular way that that rear or that lower pigtail locates itself on the control arm. So these are the two big knocks that you need to be aware of if and when you're going to cut your rear coils. That's probably vague for someone that's never heard any of this, but for what it's all worth, take my word for it. You got to know what you're doing. More or less, you got to know where to cut. Okay. We'll leave that at there. Anyway, I'm going to get these rear coils from my coupe cleaned up. We'll get them slung under the back of this car and see if we did a stock coupe spring lowering kit in the 91 Vert. Okay, folks, so you've seen it hit the ground, but let me give you a close-up. Now, to the bare eye, it's a little difficult to tell, but for experimentation purposes, I have taken pre-measurements and post-measurements. And the long and short of it is, we are now approximately 1/2 inch lower in the rear using those stock LX springs without cutting any coils off them. That's literally just the stock coupe coil. And that is about as low as I want to be in the back. I don't have the rear fenders of this car rolled. And you can see I'm already pretty much flirting with danger. As soon as I put the kids in the back, this thing is quite low. In order to properly conclude this scientific experiment, if you will, I do need to mention a couple of things. First and foremost, not all coil springs are created equally, okay? Even though these things roll off the manufacturer floor, rated at whatever spring rate they come at, there's a plus minus on everything, okay? Especially springs. So that needs to be factored in. The other side of this equation is how many miles are on the coils that you're using. So I was using 2 sets of used coils. In this case, the Vert coils that came out of this car had over 90,000 miles on them. The coupe coils that went in here, they had like 20-ish thousand miles on them. So I had this in the back of my head while I was doing the swap over, like, for all I know, there may be no change in ride height, because even though the Vert coil springs are a higher spring rate, they do have more miles on them. Therefore, they might hypothetically be sagged out a little bit. So then when I throw the coupe coil springs in, granted, they are a lower spring rate, but they're newer, like they got less miles on them. So might not see any change at all. All that being said, in my case, going from a stock Vert spring to a stock coupe spring, I was able to lower my car by 1/2 inch. So for what that's all worth, I guess I just need to put that disclosure in there, if you will. But I think it's settled, at least in my case. The coupe springs brought my car down by 1/2 inch. So thanks so much for tagging along, guys. Thanks for hearing my rambles. I really appreciate all of you, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care, guys. Bye for now.